Hey folks, Rob here. Welcome back to the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast. And today I'm joined by my colleague and friend Ben. Ben, how are you?
I'm very good, thanks, Rob. Excited for today's episode.
Yeah, thank you for making time. And the episode is all about some of the editions of the podcast which we really recommend people go back to and listen to now, because inevitably you get busy and you might not have heard it when it came out. But across the last year, we've put out quite a few episodes, and one of the key questions I get asked is, Rob, have you got anything on this topic? Or if I could just listen to one this week, what would it be? And this time of year, at the end of the year, we tend to put together 3-4 recommendations that we think will help people. Ben, this time last year, I wasn't very imaginative and I called it something like Review of the Year, 5 Things You Should Listen to or similar, whereas you came up with a better idea. What did you suggest?
I think we should be calling this the Die Hard of podcasts, because right now, up and down the country, people might be debating whether Die Hard is in fact a Christmas movie or not. But like Die Hard, Rob, this podcast episode is outstanding at any point in the year, but also even better at Christmas.
Great. So there we go. It's an evergreen one, whatever time of year you want to listen, if you're by the pool and it's summer. But equally, if December, January is your time of the year for doing more reflecting, I hope that this one will give you that. So the first one I wanted to recommend is episode 172. It's called What Do Great Fundraising Organizations Do? And it's with one of my fundraising heroes, Alan Clayton. And the reason I wanted to talk about it first is about 10, 11 months ago, I was speaking at a conference. It was lovely to be invited to go and do a talk at the University of Kent Centre for Philanthropy Studies by Beth Breeze. And I did my talk, and at the end there was time for Q&A. We'd been talking about some of the podcast episodes, and various people had been talking about ones that they'd found helpful. And someone's question was, Rob, I've realised now, actually, this is a thing, and quite a few people have been listening to this free content from Brightspot for years. I don't know how I didn't find it, but if I start from scratch, is there one episode you recommend I listen to? And without great thought and analysis, the answer that absolutely came through me was this one, episode 172. And what I said then was that, first of all, Alan spent many years studying what works in certain charities and helps them raise more money. And then about a year or two ago, he wrote a book distilling all of those ideas. And the book is called Great Fundraising Organizations. The gist of where the book came from was researching and studying all different charities, large and small, in different countries. And he was on the lookout for not ones which were losing income and therefore making less difference to their mission, and not ones staying level, but there's a very few, maybe it's 1 or 2% in any fundraising market, which are growing significantly, and not just for 1 year and then plateau again, but year-on-year growth for up to 5 years, and therefore really massively affecting the amount of good work that can be done and furthering their mission. And in those organizations, he would study what they're doing that's different to most other charities. And the gist of the results is in this wonderful book. I was delighted when Alan came on our podcast in episode 172 and talked about it. The other reason I really like it is it gets to the heart of something that's a big challenge for, frankly, most fundraisers. And many of our listeners will recognize now and again some kind of headaches or stress to do with messaging and what they can and can't say. And often they have an instinct that this corporate partner or this type of supporter would really be inspired by this kind of content or message or story, and then headaches internally and that actually not being possible. And Alan sums up better than anyone else I've heard the heart of what causes this problem. He says that our organizations need to actually be 2 businesses to achieve 1 mission. Of course, our charity should aspire to be world class at doing this kind of care or this kind of research into this disease. Do that as well as you can. Of course, that is part of the game. But secondly, aspire to be world class at meeting the emotional needs of people who care about that problem. And interestingly, those are two different problems.
I like that, Rob. And perhaps there's fundraisers out there who immediately, when you say that, realise, gosh, actually, that is a challenge that my charity is wrestling with quite often. Or there's some people who think they are doing both and don't quite realise they're not. I particularly like that episode because there's an example, isn't there, that he talks through with you that really does help bring this to life. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, in practice, very often the fundraising half of the organisation is expected to do their best with the messages and language which is appropriate and useful for the business that in the organisation that's doing the good. That sort of more objective, not emotional way of describing things is useful on the one half, but is really difficult for you to then inspire someone to vote for you or donate. Or the organisation somehow comes up with a compromise, and what you're left with is messaging that neither helps the fundraiser and at some level also is a bit unhelpful to the business in the organisation that's doing the good work. The example that brought it to life for me was the Trocker example. It's a charity in Ireland, a wonderful charity, and for years that organisation had not been significantly growing. It was hard to raise money, and broadly their messaging was about fighting for justice. And that language worked well for people who worked in the organisation, many of whom were international development professionals, and words like fighting for justice were very strong and meaningful. However, the challenge was almost all of the supporters for this organisation were middle-aged or elderly women in Ireland with Catholic Christian values. And as Alan says on the podcast, the last thing that those people wanted to be doing was fighting. It wasn't even in their lexicon. And even the word justice might sound like an entirely reasonable word and a strong emotive word to our listeners. But even that, he said, when they listened to the way their supporters actually talked and the things they talked about, the word justice either wasn't even up there as a key thing they woke up in the morning thinking about. For years, Trocker had failed to achieve significant growth. But when they stopped trying to use the messaging that worked internally with their supporters and they changed it from fighting for justice to until love conquers fear, when they made that shift and they learned the language and spoke the language of their supporters, oh my goodness, they had this spurt of amazing growth for 5 years. And my view is most of our organizations are wrestling with their version of these two different points of view, but the stress comes from not knowing that actually it's not personal. It is just inevitable in most organizations. We do have two businesses and that's okay. And actually in the book, he talks about ways in which we can find our way through that and use language and values that suits our supporters without doing harm internally and to the mission.
I love that, Rob. And many of the organisations I talk to have a similar sort of conflict. And if I were them, I would go back and listen to that episode because Alan and you just have a lovely discussion that helps to frame it. And maybe if they are overachieving, they'll even buy the book too.
Thanks, Ben. So what's an episode you would recommend that people go back and listen to?
This is a hard choice because there's just so many of them. But for me, it's episode number 174 with Katie Hillett, talking about acing all three big pitches. One of the reasons for that was we were involved with some of those pieces of work, with helping the team with their pitching. And for many of the team, they were actually on our mastery program. So we know Katie and the team really well. So well, in fact, that Rob, you and I were having a chat. We were having a one-to-one conversation. And then my phone rang with a very excited Katie telling us about the biggest of those three pitches that she'd won. And so we have this lovely live reaction of you and I on the Zoom call, kind of losing it, to be honest, as we heard about Katie winning. And I like this episode because actually, listener, one of those partnerships is live at the moment. You can see it. It's probably been on your TV adverts or on your Instagram or on your timeline. It's one of them is the partnership that Refuge has with Amaze. It's a massive partnership, right? And I like, if you now rewind and find that episode 174, knowing that some of the conversations are around pitching for a big partnership like that, I think you might even pick up some extra things as to just how hard her team worked. There's lots in that episode, but crucially, Rob, I think if I had to boil it down down, there's two key things. One of them is just how hard Katie worked seeking to understand more about what the corporate partners really wanted before she made choices of what would go in the pitch and in the proposal and in the bid. And in fact, there's a particular line that she used, which was, whatever we thought they might have liked about our proposition and our charity, it was totally different to what they actually said when we finally got the conversation with them. And having seen her original proposal and the bid, she just worked so much harder to relentlessly only include the 2 or 3 key things that would most help this company choose Refuge. And what that meant was she worked harder internally, trying to build relationships to get better evidence that Refuge could show that. She worked harder trying to find compelling stories and content, including sensitive conversations with people who her charity had helped and how they could be involved in the pitch. I mean, listen to the episode because it's an excellent one to understand the craft of pitching. And then the second thing that I quite like about it is through the act of understanding what they wanted, they practiced more than I think most others do. And they practiced at various different points to try and bring to life this content. And each time they practiced, Rob, each time they tweaked the content or they sought a bit more evidence or they spoke to the person who had been helped by Refuge, each time they did that, it was giving them absolute certainty that what they were bringing to the pitch is exactly what this company wanted. And she says, I think on the episode, do you know, even if we hadn't won, we were really proud of what we'd brought. In fact, by the time we went to pitch, she said, it felt like it was their opportunity to lose. We knew we'd hit the 3 things. And a really important part of pitching and presenting and influencing is having that certainty that what we bring is adding value to them. And if you listen to the episode, you hear her say it, and I think that came across. And Rob, you and I know that is just a fundamental part of turning up to the pitch, being more present, more likely to succeed.
Yeah. And one way that I found helpful of looking at this is that earlier in my career, if I got the chance to meet a donor or write a proposal or even go to a formal pitch like this, I was given the impression that my job was to present them with some information and then they'd weigh it up and, you know, hopefully make a good decision. Whereas later in my career, when I studied really successful fundraisers, what I've learned is they don't see it as the job of presenting information, you know, answering these questions that have been asked by this company or this donor. They see it more as, how can I convey certainty from me to them that if they say yes to this partnership or yes to this gift, certainty that it will solve a problem they care about. And again, they care about, not our chief exec cares about. And that's a different question to answer than, oh, how could we answer the brief and present the information?
Yeah.
And I agree. I listened back to that episode and you do get a really strong sense that doing those things you just mentioned, the understanding of the other side's point of view, and then finding that great content, those examples, and practicing it, you get such a strong sense that doing those things absolutely increases their certainty that this is a terrible problem, this particular thing, and if this gets funded, it will solve it, this particular problem for these people we serve. And of course, the magic of pitching isn't even about the content. It is that confidence with which you go into the room to meet the donor or the company with a certainty that this is a terrible problem and you've got a chance to solve it. If you say yes to us today, that's not arrogance, it's confidence, and it's a relaxed poise that makes you not so much desperate as offering them a wonderful opportunity. And if you can do certain things in preparation that give you that poise and confidence walking into a pitch room or a meeting with a donor or a trust or what have you, oh my goodness, it makes such a difference to people willingly and happily saying yes.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. And, you know, in hindsight, one of the things, and it was a real privilege to be asked to support them on it, but as an outside voice, one of the things was, even though they knew these were the 2 or 3 things that are most likely to convince the company, and even though they had conviction that they did it, most of my work was helping them to figure out what they should cut, what they should take out of the pitch, and to just be ruthless, still creative, still emotive, still powerful, still showing evidence, but on just these points here. I can't explain it all now. Listener, do take a look. Podcast episode 174. And again, look back knowing now that is nearly £5 million worth of income, if not slightly more, for a charity that raises between £9 and £13 million a year. That is £5 million worth of pitches.
Yeah, because of course they applied this same approach to all 3 big, valuable, possible partnerships. Hey, it's Rob, and I'm super excited to let you know that my favourite masterclass, Wow Your Donors, is back. It's happening in London on the 4th of Feb, 2026. If you like this podcast, or if you've ever found my webinars or our Bright Spot training helpful, I promise you will love the Wow Your Donors Masterclass 2026. The ideas we share are designed to help every fundraising discipline. To give you a sense of it, here's Laura Elliott, Head of Supporter Fundraising at Rennie Grove Peace Hospice, who took part last year.
It was really inspirational to be in a room with people from across the country at all different levels and stages and departments within fundraising, and to feed off that energy and that excitement and the ideas that were shared on the day. It also helped me to go away to work on the concept of personalising our approach even further, particularly with our event participants, to now see some of the great success that we're experiencing this year.
If you want to feel inspired like Laura, secure your place today before it sells out. If you're quick, you'll benefit from the early bird discount, which saves you £100. Find out more and book your place at brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services. I look forward to meeting you at Wow Your Donors 2026.
What's another episode, Rob, that you would recommend listening to?
Well, I'm going to say this one based on lots and lots of feedback we've had, both on the team days that you do with charities and the people on the mastery programs I've been teaching recently. And it's episode 182 with Atul Kumar, and it's Trusts and Foundations Success Secrets. I mean, the background is that Atul is incredibly experienced at fundraising in this way with trusts and foundations and grant givers. And through that work, he's been really curious about what sorts of things make all the difference as to whether you're going to succeed. Of course, this type of fundraising is incredibly important to lots of charities. And secondly, it has got more competitive recently. It is really difficult. So I love this episode because there are tips and tricks to help you increase your success rate. One thing that really struck me is Atul's clear insight, which is the major barrier in his experience over the years to success in this area is not getting your bid out the door. And he's found many charities aren't aware that actually they're failing to get as many bids out the door as they intended to. There's often an understandable excuse or reason why it wasn't possible to get certain information and what have you. Whereas one thing he does when he works with an organization is solve that. And interestingly, lots of the things that were getting in the way of the bid getting out the door were so solvable. It's so absurd and frustrating when you look back and say, what, for the want of 2 bits of information in that budget? That's the reason why we didn't throw our hat into the ring. Anyway, it's very compelling the way he explains it. And literally a couple of weeks ago, there's a fundraiser on our Major Gifts Mastery course who fed back that after listening to that episode, she realised that this was going on with one of her bids that she needed to get out that had sort of fallen into the long grass. That day, she got in touch with her colleague in the other half of the organisation who, the proposal was sitting with to fill in certain information. And she got in touch with them, had an actual conversation, discovered that they were getting stuck on something that was actually really quite solvable. It wasn't nearly as impossible as they thought. So she sat with them and did it together, and they solved it within 45 minutes. And that next day she pressed send. So I hope that will entice our listener to realise the act of hearing Atul explain it might just put you on the front foot to proactively get out there, solve what needs to be solved, and press send on some of those bids.
I love this, Rob. Having had to apply to trusts, foundations and corporates in my time, I have that sense of regret of times when it felt like we just didn't have the information and we couldn't dare go to the donor without the full picture, when two things could have happened. One is, within a couple of months, that information appeared. And you're right, it was a 25-minute chat that a team had to find the information. And or the donor quite liked being part of the conversation to understand what it could be like, or the caveat that could come with, this is our budget, it's mapped out as much as it can be. It may change over time because costs of things change. I love this example because I know, Rob, even in the last week, we've had WhatsApps from some of our coaches from the mastery course saying that they've won bids, trust grants, applications because of how hard they've worked to find this extra bit of information, or to help that team hold their hand really to overcome those internal barriers and get the bid out the door. I love this because, just like some of the other episodes, you listen to it and you think through, here's 2 or 3 things I could do differently.
Yeah. And there are lots of tips in there. Atul does a whole course on this, but in the half-hour episode, we managed to squeeze in several great tips. And another one that's really quite different, but I love it, is about the power of a name, the disproportionate power of a project name. And Atul shares the example, I think, from the Conservation Volunteers charity. About many years ago, they had a project which was called something like the Wednesday Afternoon Conservation Volunteering Group. And with the help of one of their supporters who was a GP, they changed that mouthful to just calling the thing Green Gym. And the rest was history. Oh my goodness, the funding for that project absolutely took off when it had that catchy title that had the primary benefit, green, and the secondary benefit, it's good for you, in a snappy title, 2 concrete words. And Atul also shares, I think for the same organisation, much more recently, he was working with them and there was various bits of work that the charity did to do with tackling the climate crisis, but in particular through mobilising young people to get involved in that and provide an opportunity to do that. And the name he came up with was Carbon Army. And long story short, it's been a real success story. It's wonderful work, but also they've got it funded. For instance, it received a grant of £183,000 from one particular foundation abroad. It got celebrity support. I think a famous gardener, Charlie Dimmock, got behind it. I think Ed Miliband got behind it. And Atul is pretty sure that this momentum is really unlikely to have happened had it had, frankly, a project name that is more typical in most of our charities. Because in most of our charities, there are, things that develop organically. And the first thing isn't a snappy title. It's some people doing good work and sort of having an internally useful way of describing that. The challenge is, all too often, you might keep that project name in your funding bids, unaware of it actually reducing your chances of success.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rob. And when I'm not delivering and helping charities through Bright Spot, I sit on the board of a foundation, and you're totally right. That type of name would stand out among the other 20, 30, 40, 50 organisations who might think they've got an inspiring sounding name, but it is still just the one that was in the first draft as they created the project however many weeks ago.
Yeah. And to be clear, this is no substitute
Yeah.
for doing good work. It's still got to have substance. It's got to be a great project to deserve funding. But what Atul would observe is there's loads of great projects that deserve funding, but which are being underserved by a title that's too much of a mouthful, it's too complicated, and or it's too much internal jargon and is not nearly as meaningful to those that might care about this issue as you realise.
Yeah.
And if there were one more that you could recommend a fundraiser out there could listen to, what would it be?
So this one, Rob, I've actually listened to 3 times now already this year. The last one was in prep for this. It's episode 184 with Debbie Johnson, who works for the Wildlife Trust. And this is the sort of episode, I've listened to it 3 times because immediately after listening to it, I turned to my wife and said, I wish I had had this sort of episode played to me 19 years ago when I was a first-time major gift fundraiser with a pool of donors who some had given in the past, but maybe at an event. Others had never given before. I had never met any of them before. And I thought my job was just ask them for money as often as you can in the hope that some of them say yes. I was so nervous about it and not knowing what to do. And I have to say, Rob, within 90 seconds of hearing the way Debbie talks about major gift fundraising to her, you notice, and she says her focus is on little things she can do to try and build a relationship with someone, to have a conversation, to catch up with them in some way. She's had a very successful career in the commercial sector. She started off as a fundraiser. She kind of was, feeling her way through. Then she came into contact with your work, Rob, with the mastery course, and it just sort of lit a light bulb for her. And she very generously shares the 2, 3, 4 different things she does that help her to deepen a relationship every day. And I remember speaking to Debbie before you'd pushed record, actually, Rob, before you chatted to her. And she talked to me, I think 4 years on from you training her. She talked to me and she said, honestly, Ben, it's just changed everything. Every day now I ask myself, what can I do to try and help just connect a little bit, move a donor relationship on a little bit, just 3 little things every day that I can do. And she said, in fact, are you by your screen? And then we dived onto a Teams chat and she there and then shared her diary with me, showing me the time she'd blocked out every morning for 3 donor moves every single morning, which I know is something you talk about on the Major Gift Fundraising course. And she goes on to talk about a particular story. The park story is how you talk about it on your Major Gift course. But she said there was a lovely young couple who had been supporting the charity, a good amount, but sort of 5 figures, maybe something like that, slightly less. And she said once she asked herself the question, how can I, deepen a relationship with them? She asked for a coffee, a meeting, a chance to catch up. And the husband said, actually, I would, but we're going to be really busy. I'm expecting my first child this week. So things are going to get really busy for us. And I love the way Debbie frames it, Rob. She says, I had to rewind the clock quite a long way to remember what it was like to have my first child. But I do just remember, A, the exhaustion, but B, you do kind of want to get out the house a bit. You do need to get some fresh air. And she said, and I had their address, I had a look, and there is a local park that I knew that was really close to them. So I wasn't pushing for a meeting, I wasn't pushing to get a gift. I just was thinking, from their point of view, I think they want to get out the house a bit. So what if I say, I know this park, it's down the road from you. What if we just go for a nice walk? Now, remember, it's the Wildlife Trust that she works for. I can see how that works quite well. She said, what if we go for this walk? And she said they had this lovely walk, but she said to me, I have since met them quite a few times in that park. It's where we go to meet. And I remember the first time he was pushing the baby in the pram. Now I'm playing with that child and pushing them on the swings. And she said it's just that same couple went from giving cumulatively about 5-figure gifts to, she said, I think she says on the podcast, 7 figures now cumulatively. Is that right?
Their overall gifts now has totaled around £1 million.
Yeah, around £1 million. And she, look, fundraiser, if you're in Major Gift Fundraising, or there's someone in your team who's just started in Major Gift Fundraising, then I would say after this, go to podcast episode 184 and just listen, because she talks first of all about the ideas that helped her and then has examples about how she's used them within a year and a bit to double her income, lots of other things too. But if you are in Major Gift Fundraising, or in all honesty, higher value corporate trusts, have a listen to episode 184 because I think it will help you.
Thanks, Ben. Having had the chance to work with Debbie, I always finish conversations with her encouraged and a little bit inspired. And I really think that if our listeners check out this one, they will experience the same thing. We need to wrap things up. We will put in the episode notes links to these 4 episodes to make it easy for you to go and find those episodes, or just Google the title of the episodes we've been mentioning. I hope you'll find them. And one other thing, we're looking forward to putting together one new episode, which will be along the lines of 4 habits that will change your fundraising year in the new year ahead. So do look out for that one as well. But for now, Ben, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Rob.
There you go. Thank you so much for listening and for supporting the Fundraising Bright Spots show. If you enjoyed it, I'd be super grateful if you take a moment and share it on with your team or on LinkedIn. so that together we can help as many good causes as possible. Good luck with your fundraising and your leadership today, and I look forward to sharing another Bright Spot story with you very soon.